So thank you. You know, this is like a dream come true for me because I've had my work in museums before, but never had the opportunity to talk to the docents. And so, you know, people would walk up and they'd be like, oh, okay, you know, and then they just walk right by, you know, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, it took so long to weave this, you know, and, you know, how do I get that message, you know, how do I either write it on the plaque or get that message across on, you know, weaving is a very physical and mental activity, really, and you have to be all there when you're doing it, because if your mind is wandering and things like that, then you make weave mistakes, right? And so, and also, I think the most important thing as a weaver, I have a, we'll step back for a second. My weaving studio and my design studio is in New York City, in the East Village of Manhattan. I was a graduate of the BFA program here in 1981. I graduated, and I came here to be a printmaker. I thought that's what I wanted to do. My parents, my grandmother was a portrait painter, and my mother did set designs, and my dad did watercolors, but he was a third-generation scrap metal dealer. And so I grew up in Bloomington, Illinois, working at the scrapyard every Saturday with my dad and watching artists come in and grab material and matter out of the scrapyard, and then they would make art out of it. So I actually thought everybody had bumper car art, you know, as part of their collections, because we did, you know, we had much to my mother's dismay, she hated the bumper car man out in the backyard. But I was like, nobody else has bumper car art, why is that, you know? But so I grew up kind of understanding about recycling and how important it was, and it was a part of our lives. We had a bin in the back of our house where all the cans went and all the paper went and the cardboard went and all of this. And so when I moved to New York, I said to my landlord, where do you put your cans, and, you know, where do you put the paper, and where's all your recycling stuff? And they're like, where are you from, you know? And I was like, oh my God, they did, you know, this didn't happen. And so I was really miffed by that whole experience. That it wasn't until years later did they start recycling. But I've always lived what I would consider a sustainable life. I you know, always had compost. We always had a compost, and, you know, had a garden, and we would do all of that. I mean, it was just like a holistic kind of way of thinking, and I still have that to this day. So this work was really based on you know, how did I pivot from a design career? I've been in the architecture and design industry developing textiles for 42 years. And so I was the creative director of Knoll Textiles I was there for a good 18 years. Always as an outside consultant. I'm better being creative on the outside. But because my father would talk about the business all the time, I had like a creative mind, but also a business mind. How do you run a business, and the employee aspects of it, and the people, because I knew everybody, and how did it work, and some people would come, and some people will leave, and then you're like, oh, how does that work, you know, because these are the conversations. And so I was very familiar with the concept of running a design studio or a business. And so I have a design studio in New York. I was very lucky in 2003 I was a single mom with, my son is now 32, he was 8 at the time, to find a building that had been on the market for 3 years that I could purchase if I just sold my 4-floor walk-up apartment that was in the West Village. It was insane. You know, you could buy a building actually at that time for what it cost to have an apartment in the other side of town, because it was not a desirable place at all. Now I could never touch this area at all. So the East Village is it was the Hells Angels block. There was a lot of meth clinics and stuff like that. But I wanted to, that was when, in 2003, that's when I really needed to work from home and start building a practice and getting into my weaving, and not just work, not my industry work. So if you go online and look at under my website, you'll see it's divided into industry and art. And I've always, I started living that life. So in 2010, though, my father came to New York, and he was, the doctors gave him about 3 to 4 months to live, and he had a triple bypass and all of this stuff, and I'm like, you have a lot longer to live than a few months, and I wanted him to see my doctors, and so I brought him in, and when he was there, I was like, oh, I should weave something for Dad, like, he's like, what are you weaving? He'd always be like, what are you weaving? Screaming from the bedroom, are you weaving anything right now? And so I was like, what do I have in the house that I could weave? And I had dry cleaning hangers. And so I was like, this I could do, this is something that I want to do. And so the first concept really was, for my dad, was to weave from this part of the hanger. And, so I just took those dry cleaning hangers and I cut them up with a wire cutter. And I'm like, these are so beautiful. And the warp yarn is made from a sheath core. It's called a sheath core fiber. It has a polyester inside, and then it's pulled through a polymer that coats it. And this is material that I developed when I was at Knoll for scrubbable wall covering. And so my studio downstairs, my building, the lower level, and if you come to the talk tonight, you'll see images of how I work in that world. But it's a library of materials, because I've spent my whole career building new fibers and building new yarns to create new materials for the architecture and design industry that then get used for upholstery fabric and drapery and wall covering and stuff like that. So this yarn happened to has strong enough tenacity to hold this. I'm going to hand it to you. It's very heavy. So, so when so an architecture, head of a design firm came to my studio and asked what this was. She saw it sitting on the table, and she was like, what is this? Like, I want this for this client that we have. We have an Ellen at Sui, and we need, and I said, oh, she goes, how much is it a square yard? I'm like, no, it's not like that. Like, this is hand woven. And she's like, you hand wove this? What is it? And I said, it's dry cleaning hangers. And she said, this is perfect. We need a woman from the United States to juxtapose Ellen Atsui's work, because and I know you have a piece here at Hansher. And so I was like, wow, I would be honored. Like, really? It's like one of my first big, weaving commissions. And I said, because I had woven that, and I said, what's the elevation look like? Like, how big do you really, here I'm thinking it's just gonna be a small piece, but she's like, you know how big Ellen Atsui's work is? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, like how big do you want it? And so it was, it was like 13 feet, by 8 feet. And so I did the math. I counted how many hangers were in there, and I needed about 3,500 hangers. And I said to them, like, this is gonna take me 6 months at least to go around every dry cleaner in New York City and collect hangers. Okay, if that's what and they said, you figure out how to budget for this, because you need to give us a price. And I'm like, well, it's gonna be about 6 months of, every week going to dry cleaners and picking up. And I said, your architecture firm, you have like 500 people there, and they never told me who the client was at the beginning until after, after I signed on and gave them a price and all of that. And I said, couldn't whoever you're building for, could they collect hangers? And what about the construction guys, could they collect hangers? He was like, everybody should start collecting hangers for this project. Then it's not going to be a big budget item, line item on your budget. And so they thought that was a great idea. I got a shipment every week. But then I realized my calculations were off because a lot of the dry cleaning hangers came with the cardboard tube. And I'm like, I needed the long sections too, and so, I amped it up another 2,000 hangers. So at the end of the day, I had about 5,300 hangers to work with, and which then became a piece for the Gates Foundation. So that was like, afterwards I was like, whoa, this went into the Gates Foundation, so that was really fascinating that, you don't know until you know what it is. And, we had this conversation yesterday in my lecture that as an artist, I have to sign NDAs for these corporations so that I can't socialize anything, and I can't talk about the work that I'm doing and stuff until they have the work, and then it's shown, and sometimes they don't want to show your name, and there's all kinds of things. So it's kind of a thing that you have to be really clear early on when you get these contracts that I want to be able to show my work after it's done, and I want my name to be on the work, and why wouldn't it? But it's like I have to hire intellectual property attorneys and stuff like that, which was stuff that I hadn't understood. So it's been great talking to the students because they never had even thought about that, that's something that as an artist that I have to go through when I'm working with architecture firms and big corporations and stuff like that. So I'm working on 2 18-foot commissions for 2 different companies right now, totally different materials, some of them with dry cleaning hangers. But so I always, even though we signed NDAs, I always throw a non-photo party, a going away party for my pieces. And I will invite, I'm like, I'm going to invite all the museum curators in New York, and I'm going to invite people I don't know. I'm a little intimidated by the whole museum thing, and I'm going to invite, design firms and things like that to the going away party. And a curator came from a museum, and she went down to the lower level where all the hooks were. And she was like, because she saw, the big piece was hanging, and she's like, it's stunning. And then she went downstairs and looked at all that, and she came upstairs, she's like, what are you gonna do with the hooks? And I was like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought about weaving with the hooks yet. Like, I just finished this piece, and I'm like, how do I weave with the hanger hooks, right? And so this is the first iteration was to figure out, I'd spent a lot of time in my Knoll days because the CEO was the president of the Chinati Foundation in Marfa, Texas, which is where Donald Judd's work was. And Donald Judd's work are, perfect square aluminum squares, and there are all of these modules of it. So I thought, I think it would be so cool to make a weaving, like big, heavy weaving with these hooks. And I'm gonna start, I warped up the loom, I was all ready to weave it. I thought I was gonna be doing, big bands of this weaving. And so the way that you open the shed, the shed opens, and I would, like a tapestry, feed in, the hook part. It's like, goes like that, and then it's twist, and then it goes like that, and feed in 13 hangers across the width. I left a selvage on both sides, and the front selvage, and then I would put a single pick in, and which would make the hangers stand up, and then I'd do the next row, and then a single pick of a dobby weave, plain weave, and it held the hangers in place. And so I started doing this, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty easy. I wasn't expecting it to be that easy. And so I adjusted the loom to bring it forward. Have you all seen how the loom works and stuff like that? So press the gear, and I'm moving it forward. And now all of a sudden, this weaving is like coming around the front beam, and like scratching my leg, you know, like, and I'm like, whoa, now this is like really, I don't know if I can do that, you know, like how is this gonna work, right? And so I put a cloth over my leg. I just took an apron, a really heavy apron, and put it on my legs, and I kept weaving it. And then I realized the weight of it was forcing the shuttle to like fly open, you know, the tension was way too much for the loom. And so I had to stop and immediately rethink how I was going to do it. So what this is made of, this is the initial prototype, is 9 squares. And so those 9 squares, I was like, how am I going to do this? So each square, then I realized, they're so heavy, these pieces, and I'd have to cut them off the loom. You know, each time I wove them, I'd cut them off and lay them on the table. And I was like, how am I gonna frame this now? And, you know, at the time I was like, I'm gonna make a bunch of these. And after I finished it, I'm like, I'm gonna make one of these, one of these. But, so what I've done, and you can see on the side that I had to pull this around, and I sewed the 3 sections together and then bound this around 3 different, or a board, and then used a French cleat behind each one. So the instructions are very clear that, you know, you have to hang this one first and then this one, because the way the hangers are. So I'll hand this around, and so you can see that. So it became a big thing, you know, like how is it going to, how do you weave it, well, how are you gonna hang it with weight like this? What does that mean, you know? And then to ship it out, having really elaborate instructions. And so there's a woman here that works in the department, and I met her briefly today, and it's Sarah. Yeah. She's killer. Because they sent me pictures when they were installed, and you could see the sections in between, and so you all of a sudden realize, like, this isn't one big piece, it's 3 sections. And so we had called earlier, and we're like, could somebody judge this, you know, like just start judging the wires? And they're like, really? You know, you want us? And I'm like, yeah. Just, I mean, it's wire hanger, you know, like they just need to be adjusted. And so, and I said, I'll come before I was going to meet with you to see if it needed any more work. But Sarah she came down, and I go, Sarah, you can't see the seams at all. So it's nice to see that this is one big body of work. So that's the history behind that. And I continued to, I have so many different structures made. So this is the plastic that goes over. You know, I mean, you guys, when, you know, it's such a, you know, necessary but evil practice, dry cleaning, because there's such an abundance of material that is really used. And so a lot of these are leftover yarns that I had used in development, wire hangers, the plastic coating. I have ones that are the paper that, you know, they stuff in the arms and all of that. So I do a lot of different, do you want me to pass this around? Yeah. You know, there's such...
Is the warp the same on this?
Yeah, the warp is the same. I found that this warp, and it's a different warp. I mean, it's the same material, but this is a 2-color twisted. I did a lot of development with the fiber manufacturer. When we get deep with fiber manufacturers, we try all different concepts with them to see how far we can take their process development in yarn making and fiber making and stuff like that. And so my studio downstairs is like a library filled with all kinds of different types of fibers. Some of them are tape fibers, and some of them, you know, they're just different types of fibers. So from this kind of very heavy duty work that I was doing, I I had gone through a divorce. The same year that my dad came, it was kind of like a year that my son was going to college, and I was, you know, I had gotten married, and then it just wasn't working, and so I just was like it was very sad, you know, and I had, you know, a couple boxes of divorce documents, and so I was like, I called my attorney and I said, do I have to hold on to this stuff? Like, what, I mean, it's just sad. And he goes, well, what do you want to do with it? And I'm like, I kind of want to shred it and weave it, you know? And so I said, but I want to read it first. I just don't want to go through that again. I just want to understand what, you know. And as you kind of read through all of the stuff, you know, the memory of like, oh, yeah, that was bad there, or that was his thing, you know, or whatever, you know, you do all of that stuff. So for me, it's really about transformation of materials, like, but also how we you know, our transformation, our own personal transformation. And so I went through a series of, you know, I did 2 huge shredded divorce documents, and I have to say that those things sold right away. It's the weirdest thing. Like,
so many people relate to
so it is so crazy that is like, I'm like, seriously? And then people would call and they're like, could you do my divorce documents? And I'm like, I'll do them, but the thing is you have to read them. I don't want to sort through your documents. You have to read them and like make sure you know what your part was in it, and then we'll discuss how you want it, you know, what you want it to be. Like, I did one called His and Hers, like the assets that he wanted and the assets that I wanted. So, you know, it was like mine was really thin and flat, and his was like big. You know, it wasn't real, but you know, it was kind of like, you know, making a thing about, you know, that, and you know, and so the conversation usually stops there. But if I had any more documents, I could definitely, if I ever need to, I could probably just make a living on shredded divorce documents. But then the other aspect is I go to the beach on the weekends in Fire Island, and this is not one from Fire Island. I was just in Chicago. But I started collecting Mylar balloons off of the beach. There's thousands of Mylar balloons. It's so scary. And I just want you guys to smell this, and you can smell the toxicity of this. And so this is a very toxic subject matter here, and it also, you can really, the off-gassing is crazy. The ones that I get on the beach, and they will never biodegrade, that material will never biodegrade. And it has all these metallic particles in it. So I started collecting these, and I would get them, and then in my clothes, you know, I have one of those, you know, whatever you call it, clothes, laundry hanging things in the backyard. It's actually clothesline, exactly, laundry hanging thing. And so I will pin them up on the clothesline and let nature wash them off. At first I started cleaning them. I'm like, this is so not sustainable, cleaning balloons off you know, with water, you know. And so I realized if I hang them, you know, long enough, rain's gonna come, clean them off, sun's gonna dry them, and then I have them all color graded. I have thousands, and, you know, I'm known as the balloon lady, much to my son's dismay, that, you know, he's trying to, you know, have a girlfriend at the beach, and people come up to the house and like, is your mom the balloon lady? And he's like, Mom, like you're like ruined my cover here. I'm trying to date somebody, and it's just like everybody just wants to know where the balloon lady is, but no. So I started collecting those, and this is what this piece is. It's a smaller piece, and I was talking to Lauren, and I really want to. We discussed, because this is my living room basically. And this is too small for the museum, so I just, you know, we discussed today, I'll weave a big Mylar piece for the museum, and we selected a color direction that we're going to go in. So I'm very excited after I get done with the two pieces that I'm doing now. But this is like playing with stuff. I did get there's a TEDx talk that I did that it goes through the divorce papers and the Gates piece, and then the Temple Emmanuel. There's a temple in Dallas that I won after like losing it to another weaver for many months. And then I finally convinced the rabbi to let me weave it because I really wanted the project. But it's a great story about and it's so much lighter in weight. So.
Upcycling. So those are Mylar balloons you've woven.
So these are Mylar balloons. There's a little paper going around that shows. I usually, for my Mylar pieces, I do a mugshot of each balloon that I weave. And so that gets included in a little booklet of all the podcasts that I listen to when I'm weaving, or books on tapes and stuff like that. Because, the essence of everything is in the weaving. And so for the Temple Emmanuel project, I really wanted to do that work, and because they have a very famous Annie Albers weaving in their main sanctuary, and the sanctuary is amazing, but it's a sanctuary for 2,000 people, and people, they just aren't using it, and and weddings, it's too big of a sanctuary for weddings these days, and so they added a chapel, and I was one of the many weavers that they called to talk to, and when they found out the subject matter of my weavings, they stopped talking to me, basically. They were like, who is she? This is, and I realized it was like radio silence. They were really keen to work with me, and then all of a sudden they weren't, because they went online and they saw, and I sent my, my portfolio and stuff on digitally, and it was like, I didn't call them for a very long time, and then I thought, I want to call them. I really want this project. And so I called the architect, and which you're never supposed to do. This is like, you're not supposed to do stuff like that. But I called the architect and I said, did you guys award this to somebody? And they're like, well, we're talking very strongly to a woman, outside of the country that's doing beautiful wool pieces. And I'm like, that's just not right, And he's like, well, I think, how are you going to hang it, and how's it going to be on the, on the ark? Like, it's going to cover 4 toras, and it's a big 9, feet tall. And he's like, well, I don't know. We haven't talked about that. And I said, well, you have to talk about that before she can even weave it. Like, so let's talk about it, because I really want this project. And so we talked about it, and he said, I think you should come back down and show your work. And I went down and I took a bunch of balloons with all these, newborn baby, pink balloons, and, coming home balloons, and all these milestones of people's lives and stuff that were all on the balloons. And I sat down with the rabbi and the art committee, and I said, I know you guys think I'm a kook, dry clean hangers, divorce document, and they were all like, yeah, and then, and I said, but Rabbi, isn't part of your job to transform people's lives, from feeling not so great into something better? And he's like, well, you could put it that way. And I go, so that's what my work's about, is taking trash. There's so much trash. Because they want, Suzanne, can't you just weave with a natural, normal fiber or material? And I'm like, no, I don't want to buy stuff. I have stuff. Let's use what we all have in abundance. And so he excused me from the room, and I went out, and the architect was like, that was good, And then I came back and I was awarded the project. But it was so nice, because I was like, gosh, I can't believe they're just going to do not that there's anything wrong with the beautiful weaving, but I just wanted it to be something more for them. And they use it as a teaching tool. I gave them a little booklet, every balloon that's in there, so that the kids know, what we do. And I do weaving workshops and things like that all the time. So that's something else that we were talking about today, coming back and doing a weaving workshop with everybody, bringing whatever you have. Like I just finished a weaving workshop and everyone brought their grandmother's old jewelry that they had, you know, all this costume jewelry, and made weavings out of jewelry. I mean, they're beautiful, you know, but you need to keep them on the frame loom that we have, because you can't, it's too heavy to come off. But so there's all these different things that we have in the midst that can create beautiful art. So that's really what my work is about, is kind of utilizing the stuff that we have around us and creating beauty out of it, and memory, you know, all the memories of this. So